Hi everyone, just a short video lecture to accompany the week 2 material. As usual, just a quick agenda. What we're going to do, I want to talk about each of the readings real quick, and then just give you a few big takeaways. I mean, we're still at the point in the course where we're thinking about ideas sort of broadly and sort of orienting ourselves to the landscape of what it is we're doing here. So so I'll give you a little preview of what that material is going to look like, just for the sake of repetition and emphasis. So the whole point of this course is to think about policies that are family friendly, trauma focused. I believe the syllabus, if I could just look at my hard copy real quick, says how to implement family focused and trauma informed changes to improve client services. And so we spent kind of last week thinking about the nature of trauma and reviewing the 5 points of trauma-informed care, or 6, depending on which model you subscribe to. And what we're doing this week is sort of understanding that trauma is a political topic, meaning that the effects of trauma are not distributed equally across groups. There are some groups that experience trauma more severely or more keenly than others. And what that means is that we need policy to sort of ameliorate the effects of trauma. The other thing I want to emphasize from this week's material is that the effects of trauma are really heterogeneous. What that means is that there are lots and lots and lots of possible consequences of trauma, and there is no sort of one pathway. PTSD, in fact, is only one consequence of trauma. It's actually one very specific consequence of trauma, and there's actually probably 100, or actually there's probably more. There's probably hundreds of different ways to have PTSD. But other mood disorders, other behavioral problems, other say substance abuse problems, so on and so forth, are all possible consequences of trauma. And social workers are pretty good at thinking about sort of individual consequences and heterogeneity. So we're sort of uniquely positioned to sort of do all this work. So let's just talk about the Bowen and Rashid reading. This is a paper we're going to sort of engage with throughout the course of the semester, because they propose a model for assessing policy that we follow, obviously, for the paper. So keep this paper handy, because it's something that we'll come back to a couple of different times. So in addition to providing the framework for the policy analysis, one of the things they argue is that the effects of trauma are not equally distributed. They're concentrated in vulnerable groups. That means vulnerable groups of people experience trauma at disproportionate amounts relative to other groups. And the result of that is that trauma has a political element, and policies thus need to be cast in a way that reflects the values of trauma-informed care, so that we can ameliorate the effects of trauma. One of the examples that comes to mind frequently is the pop singer Ariana Grande. After the horrific massacre at her concert, she was given an early intervention, and obviously we probably don't see the personal side of her or of her life, but we can surmise through what information is available to us that early intervention for her worked. But obviously she has the means and the access to clinical care to get some kind of an early intervention. And so it's wonderful that she doesn't have to deal with the effects of that trauma. But what we have to recognize, and I'm not singling her out, I mean, this is just an example that sort of, a recent example that sort of comes to mind. What we have to recognize is that part of what facilitated the resolution in her life, was the access to a significant amount of resources. Obviously, social workers are historically concerned about very vulnerable groups, and those are groups that typically don't have access to the same resources that others do. And so the effects of trauma are not likely to be dealt with early on, or sort of in the immediate aftermath of the event. And so that's often where we come in. So the Baldwin piece, this is actually one of my favorites. This is sort of one of the papers that sets the stage for sort of the heterogeneity of responses to trauma. But Baldwin is arguing that trauma has psychobiological reactions, and if you sort of identify see the word psychobiological for its various components, obviously the psycho is the behavioral and cognitive dimension, and then biological is the sort of body or physiological reaction as well. It's interesting that many of those reactions have roots in evolutionary processes and the need to survive. But the big takeaway from the Baldwin paper is that in traumatized populations, we should expect comorbidity. That simply means more than one morbidity, and we should expect heterogeneity. So morbidities are health problems that result from a single cause, and in this case, that single cause would be trauma. And so we should expect, as clinicians or people working with traumatized groups in general, we should expect that there's going to be a variety of problems, and that those problems are often going to co-occur. Comorbidity, although technically probably means two, it in practice doesn't really mean just two things. It often means there's multiple things going on. Occasionally you see the word multimorbidity replacing the word comorbidity. But I still get the sense that comorbidity, is more more common in the nomenclature than not. And then finally the Curthua paper. I'm not sure if that's how she pronounces her name, but that's I've never met her, but that's how we're going to go with it for now. And apologies if that is wrong. If you know any better, please correct me. So Curthua introduces the idea of complex trauma, which is a repeated, often escalating traumatic experiences. Remember from the first week of material that in order for trauma to differentiate itself from stress, it has to be a threat to personal or bodily integrity. And then, like Baldwin, Curthua says that complex trauma generates complex reactions. And that just underscores for me that comorbidity and heterogeneity piece. And for her, thorough and ongoing assessments are key. And let's talk about why. So what does all this mean? Well, trauma disproportionately affects vulnerable groups. And the means to deal with trauma are very much a function of one's socioeconomic status, one's place in society. So people who are vulnerable, as I said before, typically don't have the access to resources in whatever capacity that may be. They don't have access to resources in order to deal with that trauma. And so policies, whether they're organizational, local, state, or federal, need to protect, enhance resilience and limit trauma and the reopening of traumatic wounds. Throughout the rest of the semester, we're going to look at sort of organizational policy. There's an assignment related to that coming up in a couple of weeks, and then you're going to pick a policy of your choice at the local, state, or federal level, and sort of assess it for its consistency or inconsistency with the principles of trauma-informed care. So what does all this mean for clinicians? Again, the key takeaways here from this week: the effects of trauma are heterogeneous. They can be emotional, physical, behavioral, and even sort of non-clinical, non-pathological. One of the ways we see that, for example, is a person is wary of an institution. they might feel betrayed, or just sort of express some distaste for that institution, and that might be because that institution, whether it's a healthcare system or a governmental organization or something of the like, may not have provided the care that they needed, or may have even facilitated um, that particular trauma. Secondly, trauma disclosures happen at client's pace. We can ask all we want, but if a client isn't ready to disclose, they're not going to. And that's why, unique to our profession, our assessments are sort of ongoing. We're collecting new information as we're delivering interventions, and oftentimes we're collecting information because additional disclosures or additional details about a traumatic experience are coming to light. And then lastly, we don't judge what's traumatic or not. Clients get to decide that for themselves. So, a couple of key takeaways. Social work is really in this unique position. We work alongside and hand in hand very much with people from public health, medicine, nursing, psychology, education, and so on. But we're really the only ones whose discipline involves the perspective of all of these professions. So here's an example. So medicine, nursing, other mental health disciplines like counseling and psychology and things like that are very much concerned with things at the micro level, and maybe to some degree the meso level. Public health, the policymakers, the legal profession, they're working primarily, not exclusively, but primarily at the macro level. We're all working towards sort of the same goal, which broadly is health, safety, well-being. But we're the ones, social workers are the ones who have the ability to think and then work at those three different levels of practice. And so while say medicine and law, they might not necessarily cross paths because they're working at sort of the micro end and the macro end. I'm gesturing with my hands here. I guess you can't see that. They're working at the micro and macro end, and they're working towards the same goal. They might not cross paths. On the other hand, social workers are working at all three levels, and so we very much will cross paths with people from those different disciplines. And what that means is that we're really in the unique perspective to formulate and implement policies that are trauma informed. We might not get pushback from others because, again, we're all working towards the same goal, but we're the ones who sort of have to take the lead at assessing and implementing policies that are trauma informed. So I believe that's it. Thanks for watching.